Hello everyone and welcome back to your worst nightmare YouTube channel. To help us feel even more connected as a community, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from. If you would like to share some of your horror encounter, do well to email us through the description of this video. Don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Thanks. Now, back to today's episode. I'm not exactly sure how to start this, but I'll just say it. If you're watching this video, it means I'm still alive, for now, anyway. You might not believe what I'm about to tell you, but that's fine. I wouldn't believe me either. I've tried everything, priests, police, psychiatrists, but nobody has an answer. Nobody knows why she follows me. It all started 6 months ago, on a Tuesday. I was driving back from my grandmother's funeral in the middle of nowhere, like one of those towns you see in horror movies where you ask yourself, why would anyone live there? My grandma was the last connection I had to this place. After my parents died in a car accident, she raised me, and even though we weren't close, I owed her that last bit of respect. The funeral was small, maybe 6 people, including the priest. I didn't expect much, but as I was leaving, I felt this chill. It wasn't the weather, though. It was June, and the sky was blue, clear as day. No, this was something else. You know how, in some moments, you feel like you're being watched. That's what it was. But when I looked around, nothing. Just tombstones and silence. I shook it off and drove home. About an hour into the drive, I saw something strange. A nun, just standing by the side of the road. Now, before you jump to any creepy conclusions, nuns aren't exactly rare in small towns, right? But this nun, she didn't look right. I mean, she wasn't doing anything weird, just standing there, but her presence was unsettling. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. Maybe it was the fact that she was in the middle of nowhere with no buildings in sight. Maybe it was that she wasn't trying to hitch a ride or even look at me. Just staring straight ahead, like she was waiting for something or someone. As I passed her, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her turn her head slowly, eyes following my car. And then I swear to you, she smiled. Not a kind smile, though. There was something sinister in it, like she knew something I didn't. I shuddered but kept driving, figuring it was just a weird coincidence. I mean, what was she going to do? Sprint after me in her habit? But then, I started seeing her everywhere. And I don't mean in some vague, oh, that person kinda looks like her way. No, it was her. Same nun. Same creepy stare. Sometimes she was standing on street corners as I walked to work. Other times, she'd be sitting on a bench in the park when I took my lunch break. Always watching me. And always with that same unsettling smile. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress. Grief does weird things to your brain, right? I told myself I was imagining it, just a trick of the mind, some Freudian projection of guilt for not being closer to my grandma. But it wasn't long before things got weird. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to get some sleep, when I heard it. A knock. 3 sharp knocks on my front door. Now, I live alone, so I wasn't exactly eager to answer the door at midnight. But the knocking continued, persistent. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe it was a neighbor or something, but when I checked the peephole, no one was there. I opened the door to an empty street. Only the soft hum of streetlights breaking the silence. Relieved but still uneasy, I turned around to head back to bed when my phone buzzed. A notification from my security camera app, motion detected at front door. My heart pounded as I clicked the video feed. And there she was. The nun. Standing right where I had just been. The video showed her standing at my door, staring into the peephole, as if she knew I was on the other side. She didn't knock or try to get in. She just stood there, motionless, for minutes. And then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The footage was real. I watched it over and over again, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself it was some prank. But who the hell pranked someone dressed as a nun at midnight? The next day, I went to the police. I brought them the footage, half expecting them to laugh at me. But they didn't. The officer watching the video just sat there, staring at the screen, frowning. "We'll look into it," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe me. They never followed up. Not that I was surprised. Things escalated quickly after that. I'd hear the knocks more frequently. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her in reflections, mirrors, windows, even on my phone screen when I wasn't paying attention. Every time, she'd be closer. It felt like she was closing in on me, inch by inch, watching, waiting for the right moment. I stopped going out at night. I avoided driving down any roads that looked remotely like where I first saw her. But none of it helped. Then, about a week ago, I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. It was 2 a.m., and the number was unknown. Half asleep, I answered, expecting some scam call, but all I heard on the other end was heavy breathing. I was about to hang up when a woman's voice, soft but chilling, whispered, "I see you." My heart stopped. I dropped the phone and ran to the window, half expecting to see her standing there. But the street was empty. No sign of anyone. Still, I knew she was out there, watching. I haven't slept properly in days. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her. Knocking. Whispering. And sometimes, if I dare to open my eyes in the middle of the night, I swear I see her shadow at the foot of my bed, just standing there, watching, waiting. I don't know what she wants, or why she chose me. All I know is that she's not going away. And if you're watching this, and you think this is all some kind of joke, some elaborate story I've made up, then I hope you're right. I really do. Because the alternative is that she's real. And she's coming for me. I never believed in evil. Not the real kind, anyway. Sure, the news is full of horrific acts committed by people, but those are just bad decisions, right? People go crazy, do unspeakable things, but there's always a rational explanation. Or at least, that's what I thought before I stepped into the convent of St. Amity. Now I know that sometimes there's something darker than human nature at play. Something you can't explain, no matter how hard you try. It all started with a documentary I was working on. The idea was simple: explore old, abandoned buildings and tell the stories behind them. You know, history wrapped up in a little bit of mystery. People love that kind of stuff. I'd covered dilapidated hospitals, long-forgotten mental asylums, even an old shipyard where workers vanished without a trace. But none of that prepared me for the convent. St. Amity had been around for over a century, situated in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick woods that barely let any sunlight through. When I first approached it, the place looked like any other old building. The bricks were crumbling, ivy snaked up the walls, and half the windows were shattered. But what immediately set this place apart was the statue of the Virgin Mary at the front. It was massive, looming over the entrance, her eyes chipped away so that she looked like she was weeping. Not the best first impression. The story was that St. Amity had shut down abruptly in the 1990s after rumors of abuse, mismanagement, and something else. The locals were vague about it. They'd talk about it, sure, but always with a nervous chuckle, like they weren't sure if it was true or if it was just something to scare kids away. That something else, though, always came up in whispers. Something happened to the nuns. Not to them, exactly. Because of them. Naturally, I couldn't resist. I had my camera, my mic, and my curiosity, but from the moment I stepped inside, it felt like the air changed. Thick. Heavy. Like the atmosphere you get in a room where people have just had an argument, but worse. It clung to me, pressing against my chest as I moved from room to room, filming broken furniture and overturned pews. Nothing unusual yet, just the sad remnants of a place long forgotten. Then I found the chapel. At first glance, it was nothing extraordinary. A typical, gloomy space with cracked wooden benches, the kind that creaked even if you just looked at them. There was a single cross above the altar, and a few candles knocked over on the floor. But there was something wrong with the floor itself. Deep scratches, almost like claw marks, carved in erratic circles around the altar. I started recording, commenting on the strange markings, trying to think of a plausible explanation. Rats, maybe. Large ones. Yeah, sure. Rats with claws the size of steak knives. Great documentary material. Suddenly, the camera flickered. Static filled the screen for a second, then went black. I cursed under my breath, tapping at the buttons, but no matter what I did, the camera wouldn't turn back on. Frustrated, I shoved it into my bag and took out my phone to use its flashlight. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling sound behind me. Hello? My voice echoed through the empty chapel. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows. But the rustling continued. This time, it was louder, more deliberate, like someone, or something, was moving. Slowly, I turned toward the back of the room, scanning with my flashlight. The beam landed on a single wooden door, slightly ajar, leading to the convent's inner sanctum. I hesitated. I was supposed to document, not investigate. But the scratching noises were more than just odd now. They were calling me, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. The door groaned open as I pushed it, revealing a long hallway lined with old portraits of nuns. Their faces, shrouded in their habits, seemed to watch me as I walked by, my footsteps echoing off the tiled floor. I chuckled nervously to myself, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being observed. Yeah, because pictures of dead nuns are totally comforting, I muttered, forcing a grin. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed something strange. One of the portraits was missing. The frame was there, the glass intact, but the painting inside had been removed. Or rather, torn out. Jagged edges of canvas clung to the frame, like someone had violently ripped it away. Okay, that's not creepy at all, I mumbled, my voice shaking slightly. But I kept moving, convincing myself that I'd just stumbled into some prank. Maybe local kids had gotten inside and decided to mess around. That's all it was. Totally explainable. At the end of the hallway was another door, this one with a small plaque that read, Sister Agnes, Headmistress. Of course, I had to see what was inside. The office was small, with a single desk covered in dust, and a few old papers scattered across the floor. But what caught my attention was the wardrobe in the corner. Its door was slightly open, revealing a sliver of something white inside. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but curiosity got the better of me. I yanked the wardrobe door open, half expecting to find some ratty old nun habit. Instead, what I found froze me in place. Hanging inside, perfectly preserved, was a nun's habit, but it wasn't the clothing that scared me. No, it was the fact that the habit was stained. Dark red stains splattered across the white fabric like a violent, desperate handprint. Fresh blood. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself, when I heard it. That scratching noise again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from inside the wardrobe. Before I could react, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I scrambled out of the office, my flashlight flickering wildly as I raced back down the hallway, those nun portraits seeming to smirk at me as I passed. I didn't stop until I was back outside, panting, my heart racing as if it were trying to escape my chest. The air felt clearer, lighter, like I had escaped something suffocating. I looked back at the convent one last time, that eerie statue of the Virgin Mary watching me. I never finished that documentary. Never went back to St. Amity. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something back with me. I never thought I'd find myself recording something like this. But here we are, right? My friend said I was crazy. Heck, even I think I'm losing it. But I've got to get this out there because something is seriously wrong, and people need to know. It all started 2 months ago when I took that volunteer gig. You know, the make a difference in the world type of stuff, where you sign up for a couple of days of community service because your life's been feeling kind of pointless. Anyway, the place they sent me to was a convent, a working convent, believe it or not. I didn't even know those were still a thing. But apparently, these nuns were running a soup kitchen, a daycare, and a few other things for the community. So, I figured, why not? How hard could it be? The first day was weird. And when I say weird, I don't mean spooky weird. I mean, what the hell is going on, kind of weird. The nuns didn't speak much. In fact, they didn't really speak at all unless they were telling you to do something. Like, set the tables, or take this to Sister Mary. And they had this thing about staring at you. Not like in a creepy way, but more like they were silently judging your soul. Yeah, try peeling potatoes with that kind of pressure. I figured maybe that was just their vibe, you know. People who devote their lives to God are bound to be intense, right? Plus, I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to help and move on with my life. So I ignored the weirdness and just got on with the work. But then there was her. Sister Agnes. She wasn't like the other nuns. She was older, like really old, but still moved around the convent like she was 25. It was kind of impressive, actually. Except for the fact that she never blinked. Ever. I know that sounds like a small detail, but once you notice something like that, it gets under your skin. Like, you start thinking, why doesn't she blink? Is that normal? Is this some kind of nun superpower? And the worst part, she was everywhere I went. Always in the background. Watching. Now, I'm not someone who's easily freaked out. I binge-watched all the creepy stuff on Netflix, laughed at the jump scares, the whole thing. But there was something about Sister Agnes that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the no blinking thing. It was like she knew something. Something about me that I didn't even know myself. Every time I caught her staring, she'd smile. But it wasn't the kind of smile you want to see. It was like, how do I describe it? Like she was enjoying something about me. Something she didn't even need to explain. I was able to ignore it for a few days, but then the weird stuff started happening. It was Thursday. I remember because it was the day I decided I was done. I had already texted my friend saying I wasn't coming back to the convent. Too many awkward vibes. But as I was packing up my stuff, one of the younger nuns, Sister Clara, asked me if I could help her move some boxes from the storage room. She was sweet, always smiling, so I figured, what's one last favor? The storage room was in the basement. Of course it was. I followed Sister Clara down this narrow staircase that felt like it had been built in the 1600s. Everything smelled like damp stone and mildew. The lights were flickering, but I was too focused on the fact that I wouldn't have to see Sister Agnes again to care. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, the storage room was this massive, dimly lit area with shelves of old, dusty books, random furniture, and crates that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. We started hauling boxes, and that's when I noticed a door at the far end of the room. It was wooden, heavy, and slightly ajar, like someone had forgotten to close it. I didn't remember seeing that door before. And trust me, it was hard to miss. Sister Clara, I said, what's in there? She looked at me, and for the first time, her smile faltered. We don't go in there, she whispered. Well, if there's anything you should know about me, it's that telling me not to do something is like dangling candy in front of a kid. So, naturally, the minute she left the room to get more boxes, I headed straight for the door. Look, I'm not proud of it. But curiosity, right? And besides, it's a convent, not some haunted mansion. What could they possibly be hiding? The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small room with stone walls. And at first, I thought it was just another storage space. But then I saw it something that made my stomach drop. In the center of the room was a single chair. Strapped to the chair was a man, and he wasn't moving. I froze. I couldn't tell if he was alive or dead, but he looked horrible. Pale, gaunt, like he hadn't eaten in days. His eyes were closed, and there were strange markings all over his arms, like someone had drawn symbols on him with a knife. I couldn't even process what I was seeing. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. I whipped around and found Sister Agnes standing there, just a few feet away. And this time, she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were cold, and for the first time since I'd arrived at the convent, she blinked. Once. Slowly. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and calm. Too calm. I opened my mouth to say anything, but nothing came out. My brain was scrambling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was there a man tied to a chair in the basement of a convent? Why wasn't anyone talking about this? I tried to back away, but Sister Agnes stepped forward, blocking my path. "Leave now," she said, her voice still eerily calm. "And forget what you've seen." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted past her, up the stairs, out of the convent, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I wish I could say that's where it ended. But after that day, things got worse. My phone started buzzing with blocked calls. When I picked up, there was only silence on the other end. I'd see people dressed as nuns, normal, everyday nuns, on the street, but I'd swear one of them would always look like Sister Agnes, smiling that same smile. I don't know what they're doing in that convent, but it's not holy. And I don't think I'm the first person who's seen that room. I'm just the first one who's made it out. It all started with a dare. Not one of those lighthearted, eat a spoonful of cinnamon dares, but a real one. The kind that makes your stomach twist. I never should have accepted it, but then again, I'm not the kind of guy who turns down a challenge. And when it came from my buddy Tom, I couldn't back down without looking like a complete coward. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were lounging around my apartment, bored out of our minds. That's when Tom came up with his brilliant idea. "You ever been to St. Cecilia's convent? That creepy old one near the highway?" I raised an eyebrow. "The one with the broken bell tower?" "Yeah, what about it?" Tom grinned. "That you can't go there and sit in the confession booth. Alone. For 1 hour." I laughed. "What's so scary about a confession booth? You sit, you confess, you leave. Big deal. Except this one's been abandoned for years." "They say it's cursed," Tom said, leaning in for dramatic effect. "Word is, a nun went crazy in there after hearing one too many confessions." She just snapped. I rolled my eyes. "Oh, please." But of course, the idea stuck. We drove to St. Cecilia's that evening, just as the sun was setting. The place was in worse shape than I remembered. The old stone building looked like it was barely holding together, and the windows were grimy and cracked. As we approached, the wind picked up, whistling through the empty bell tower, making it sound like the building was sighing in relief that someone had finally shown up. "Great. Just great. Ready?" Tom asked, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Ready," I replied, more confident than I actually felt. Tom stayed outside as I pushed open the heavy wooden doors. They creaked, of course. Because why wouldn't they? It's like the doors in these places are designed to be as creepy as possible. The inside was just as bad, dusty pews, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling, and a faint, musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. The confession booth was at the far end, near the altar. It was an old wooden structure, the kind you see in movies where the priest sits on one side and the sinner spills their guts on the other. I took a deep breath, glanced at my phone's clock, and sat down inside. 1 hour. Easy. At first, it was just quiet. Too quiet. My breathing sounded louder than usual, and I could hear the faint sound of the wind rattling the windows. But after a few minutes, I started to relax. This wasn't so bad. Tom's cursed nun story was clearly just that, a story. Then, about 20 minutes in, I heard it. A soft creak, like the sound of someone sitting down in the booth next to me. I froze, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard anyone else enter the chapel, and Tom was supposed to be outside. My mind immediately started playing tricks on me. Was someone else here? I cleared my throat, hoping to dispel the eerie silence. Hello? If you're here for a confession, I'm not a priest. Nothing. Just the sound of my own voice echoing in the wooden booth. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm myself down. It was probably just the old wood shifting. A few more minutes passed, and I was starting to relax again when I heard it, soft, faint breathing. But it wasn't mine. It was coming from the other side of the booth. My skin prickled, and a chill ran down my spine. I leaned forward, straining to listen. Who's there? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice, soft and almost apologetic, whispered, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced pure, unfiltered terror, but let me tell you, it's not fun. I felt my heart slam against my chest, my palms sweating as I tried to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of joke, right? Maybe Tom had sneaked inside to mess with me. Yeah, that was it. Tom was a prankster. But then the voice spoke again, and it wasn't Tom. It was a woman. "Father, I need to confess." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Look, I don't know who you are, but this isn't funny." There was a long pause. Then the voice replied, almost pleading, "I've done something terrible." I blinked, my mind racing. This had to be a prank. It had to be. But the sincerity in the voice made me pause. What if it wasn't? I leaned back against the wooden wall, trying to steady my breathing. What did you do?" There was a soft sob from the other side. "I hurt someone. Badly. I didn't mean to, but it happened, and now I don't know what to do." My skin crawled. This wasn't how I expected my Saturday night to go. "You need to go to the police," I said, my voice shaky. "If you hurt someone, you can't just..." Before I could finish, there was a loud bang from outside the booth, like someone had slammed a door. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. "Tom." I called out, hoping it was him. But there was no answer. The booth was quiet again. The breathing had stopped. I bolted from the booth, my legs shaking, and ran outside to find Tom leaning casually against the car. "Dude, what's wrong?" he asked, clearly amused by my frantic expression. "There was someone in there," I panted. "Someone confessing. She said she hurt someone." Tom frowned. "What are you talking about?" "No one else went in. I've been out here the whole time." I turned back to the church, my pulse still racing. "No, I'm telling you, there was." Tom burst out laughing, slapping his knee. "Oh man, I had you going. I put a speaker in the booth earlier. Got you good, didn't I?" I stood there, my face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and anger. You're an idiot, I said. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Tom might have been joking, but the voice I heard, that wasn't part of his prank. And the confession booth, I'll never set foot in one again. I wasn't supposed to be in that church after hours. I was working late, as I often did, at St. Michael's. My boss liked to joke that I was more of a nun than an accountant. The irony, of course, was that I hadn't seen the inside of a church in years, and certainly not because of any religious conviction. The job was just a paycheck, an easy one at that. St. Michael's wasn't a big congregation, so handling their finances was pretty straightforward. But what happened in that place? That was anything but ordinary. It started with a phone call from Father Thomas. His voice was gruff and gravelly, with that permanent cigarette rasp. He asked me to stay late and finish up some work on the upcoming audit. He seemed insistent. Weirdly insistent, actually. Do you mind staying a little later? I need those reports tonight, he said. Sure, I replied, rolling my eyes. It's not like I have a hot date or anything. He didn't laugh, which struck me as odd. Father Thomas was usually quick with a chuckle. But that night, he just grunted, muttered a quick thank you, and hung up. When I arrived, the church was mostly empty. The regular parishioners had long gone home, leaving behind the usual dim glow from the altar candles, flickering and casting shadows across the vaulted ceiling. I made my way to the small office in the back, with its musty old books and stacks of donation envelopes. It was just another night until I saw her. I was sitting there, tapping numbers into my spreadsheet, when a flicker of movement caught my eye. I glanced up and froze. Standing in the doorway was a nun. Now, I know that doesn't sound terrifying, but this nun wasn't supposed to be there. For starters, St. Michael's hadn't had nuns in residence for years, not since the convent was converted into a guest house for visiting clergy. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, staring at me. It wasn't just the fact that she was there that creeped me out. It was her eyes. They were off. I can't explain it well, but her eyes looked wrong. Dark, almost lifeless, like there was something beneath the surface that didn't belong. Can I help you? I asked, my voice trembling just a little. She didn't respond. Didn't move. Just stood there, her habit perfectly pristine, her face pale as marble. I figured she was waiting for something. Maybe Father Thomas had sent her to check on me. But the longer she stood there without saying a word, the more the tension in the room grew. My hands started sweating. Every second felt like a lifetime. Are you lost? I asked again, forcing a smile. Still nothing. I decided that was enough weird for one night. I closed my laptop and packed my bag, fully intending to leave. But as I moved, so did she. She stepped back, quietly, smoothly, into the hallway, as if guiding me toward the front of the church. My stomach churned, but I followed her out of the office, thinking maybe this was some weird prank Father Thomas was pulling. But when I got to the entrance of the church, she was gone. Vanished. I glanced around, waiting for her to reappear, to explain herself. But the air was dead silent, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden pews. I figured I was just tired, stressed, whatever. Nuns don't just disappear, right? Still, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I started toward the front door, my pace quickening. But as I passed the sanctuary, something caught my eye again. The candles on the altar flickered violently, as if someone had walked by them. But the air was still. No breeze, no open windows. Just the eerie, unshaken silence. I cursed under my breath and kept walking, faster now, determined to get out. But then, I heard it. A soft shuffle. Like footsteps. I turned, and there she was again, standing at the back of the church, just outside the confessionals. Her eyes locked onto mine. This time, there was no mistaking it. The look in her eyes wasn't human. It was hungry, almost predatory. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but something else, curiosity, fear, whatever, kept me rooted to the spot. She didn't move. She just stared, her lips slightly parted, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock it. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, call Father Thomas. The police? But just as I got the screen to light up, I heard the softest, faintest voice whisper my name. Sarah. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, loud enough that I could hear it in my ears. I looked around. No one. Just the nun, standing there, unblinking, watching me. And then she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't even a human smile. It was too wide, too forced, like her mouth was stretching farther than it should. And then she spoke again, but this time her voice was louder, more insistent. Sarah. I dropped my phone. It clattered loudly against the stone floor, the sound echoing through the empty church. In that moment, I bolted. I didn't care where she was or what she wanted. I just needed to get out of there. I sprinted down the aisle, my footsteps slapping against the cold stone, and threw open the front door. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. I kept running, not stopping until I was halfway down the street. Only then did I dare to look back. The church stood dark and still, the flickering lights barely visible through the stained glass windows. I didn't go back the next day. I didn't even quit in person. I called Father Thomas and told him I was done. Whatever was happening at St. Michael's was way above my pay grade. But here's the thing. A week later, I got a call. It was Father Thomas. His voice was shaky, and he wasn't calling about the audit. Sarah, did you see her? I went cold. What are you talking about? He paused, and then said quietly, the nun. I've been seeing her too. I hung up. I haven't spoken to him since. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those eyes. And I wonder if she's still watching. Or worse, waiting. I'll be the first to admit that I didn't believe the rumors. Who would? I mean, a creepy old convent turned into a guest house for travelers. It sounded like the perfect setup for some B-grade horror flick. But in my defense, I was broke, and it was the cheapest place to stay near the hiking trail. So, there I was, dragging my suitcase up the cracked stone steps of what used to be St. Cecilia's convent, fully expecting nothing more than a slightly uncomfortable bed and the lingering smell of mothballs. I was wrong. The first thing that struck me as weird, well, weirder than I expected, was the nun at the front desk. I wasn't expecting to see anyone in a habit, let alone working at what was essentially a glorified Airbnb. But there she was, peering at me through thick glasses, her face pale and sunken, like she hadn't seen daylight in a while. Welcome, she rasped, her voice scratchy like she'd been gargling gravel. You're in the last room. The last room. That should have been my first red flag, but instead, I just nodded, smiling awkwardly as she handed me the key. The key itself was an antique, one of those heavy brass ones you'd expect to find in a haunted castle or a Scooby-Doo episode. You know, the kind that practically screams, I'm cursed. But I was too tired to care. After hiking all day, I just wanted a shower and to collapse into bed. The convent-turned-guest house was bigger than I expected. As I followed the narrow hallway, I noticed the walls were lined with old portraits, nuns, presumably from the convent's heyday. All of them wore the same severe expressions, their eyes dark and judgmental, as if they could see straight into your soul. I wasn't exactly the praying type, so I just avoided making eye contact and kept walking. My room was at the very end of the hallway, naturally. The last room. As I unlocked the door, it creaked open with a kind of dramatic flair that would have made a horror movie director proud. Inside, the room was about what I expected: sparse, clean, and cold. The bed looked like it had been designed by someone who hated comfort, and the crucifix hanging on the wall was tilted at a slightly unnerving angle. But hey, a bed's a bed, right? I dropped my bag on the floor and went to take a shower, fully prepared for lukewarm water and lousy water pressure. But when I stepped into the bathroom, I noticed something odd. The mirror, it was missing. There was a space where it should have been, just an empty frame nailed to the wall. Weird decor choice, I muttered to myself, but hey, maybe they were going for minimalism. Still, it gave me the creeps. After my shower, I collapsed onto the bed, the springs groaning beneath me, and pulled out my phone. No service. Of course. The place probably hadn't seen a tech upgrade since the 1800s. I sighed and flipped through the guidebook I'd picked up in town, reading about local trails and wildlife. As the sun set, the room grew colder, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and something faintly metallic. Then I heard it. A knock. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway, maybe another guest. But no. The sound was coming from inside the room. Specifically, from the wardrobe. Now, let me tell you, I'm not the jumpy type. I'm more of a skeptic than anything, so I just assumed it was old pipes or the wood settling. But the knocking kept going. Slow, deliberate. Knock. 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 I froze, staring at the wardrobe, half expecting it to burst open and reveal, I don't know, a raccoon or something. But it stayed shut. The knocking, though, that didn't stop. Okay, very funny, I muttered, my voice shaky despite my attempt to sound tough. If this is some kind of weird guest house prank, I'm not impressed. The knocking stopped. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly, and walked toward the wardrobe. The air around it was freezing, like someone had left the door to the Arctic open. My hand hovered over the handle, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, because apparently I'm an idiot, I opened it. Nothing. Just empty hangers swaying slightly, as if disturbed by a breeze that didn't exist. I sighed, half relieved, half annoyed at myself for freaking out over nothing. But as I turned to close the door, I noticed something. There was a small, folded piece of paper tucked into the corner. Curiosity won out, and I grabbed it. Unfolding the note, I read the shaky handwriting scrawled across the page. Do not stay in the last room. Well, that was comforting. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was just some leftover note from a former guest trying to be funny. Real original, I muttered, crumpling the note and tossing it onto the nightstand. I climbed back into bed, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. Sleep, however, didn't come easily. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. Faint, barely audible, but definitely there. It wasn't coming from the hallway. No, it was inside the room again. This time, from the corner near the crucifix. I sat up, heart pounding, trying to make out the words. But the whispering wasn't in English. It was something else, something I couldn't quite place. And then, in the middle of the whispers, I heard it. Laughter. Soft, high-pitched laughter. Like a child, but off. Twisted. The kind of sound that crawls under your skin and stays there. All right, nope, I said out loud, throwing the blanket off and grabbing my bag. There's brave, and then there's stupid, and I wasn't about to find out which category I belonged in. As I stumbled toward the door, the laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls. My hand fumbled with the key, shaking as I tried to unlock the door. Finally, I yanked it open and sprinted down the hallway. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me as I ran, their eyes following my every move. I didn't stop until I was outside, breathing in the cold night air, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I glanced back at the convent, its dark windows staring back at me, silent and still. The laughter was gone, but I swear I could still hear it, faint, lingering in the back of my mind. The next morning, I left without looking back. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. What was I supposed to say? That the last room at the convent had decided to whisper creepy nothings in my ear. No one would have believed me. But I learned one thing that night. When the nun at the front desk hands you the key to the last room, maybe, just maybe, book a hotel instead. I work as a part-time handyman, fixing leaky pipes, broken heaters, stuff like that. Mostly, I get called to office buildings and houses, but a few months ago, Father Brennan from the old St. Mary's Church called me in to fix a plumbing issue. Now, this church is one of those massive, Gothic-style buildings with towering ceilings and stained glass windows that look like they belong in a museum. It's beautiful, sure, but it also gives off this ancient secrets buried under the floorboards vibe. Anyway, Father Brennan's a good guy, kind of serious, but always polite. When I arrived, he was waiting for me near the confession booths, which immediately struck me as weird because, pipes aren't exactly located inside those wooden boxes. He had this anxious look on his face, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Thanks for coming, Jacob," he said, glancing around like he was expecting someone, or something, else to show up. "We've been hearing strange noises. Coming from, well, inside the confessional." Now, I know what you're thinking. Confession booths don't have plumbing. And I was thinking the same thing. But Father Brennan just shook his head when I asked him. "No," he said, lowering his voice, "it's not the plumbing. It's something else." Okay, so now we're getting into some weird territory, right? But curiosity got the better of me. I mean, how often do you get invited to solve a mystery inside a church? "All right, let me take a look," I said, grabbing my flashlight. I mean, worst case scenario, it was probably some critters stuck in the walls or faulty acoustics. Maybe someone was pranking the priest. Father Brennan nodded quickly, like he couldn't wait to be rid of the whole situation. He told me he'd be in the office if I needed anything and practically sprinted out of there. I was alone now, standing in front of the confessional booths, and suddenly the whole place felt 10 degrees colder. The confession booths were your typical old-school wooden ones, tiny compartments with thin walls and a small window in between for, well, confessing. The booths creaked ominously as I opened the door to step inside, but I didn't think much of it. Just old wood, right? I sat down inside the priest's side of the confessional, shining my flashlight around. There was nothing, just the wooden walls and the faint smell of incense. I knocked on the wall, waiting for some raccoon or bat to come scurrying out, but there was only silence. Everything seemed fine. Then I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe Father Brennan's voice echoing from his office. But the sound was too close, too deliberate. It was a low murmur, like someone whispering directly into my ear, and it definitely wasn't coming from outside the booth. It was coming from inside. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." I froze, my heart doing that awkward flip-flop thing it does when your body can't decide whether to freak out or play it cool. I leaned in closer to the dividing window, peering into the penitent's side of the booth. I expected to see someone sitting there, maybe a parishioner sneaking in late at night for a confession, though why they wouldn't just say something when I entered was beyond me. But the booth was empty. I stared at the wooden seat across from me, waiting for someone, anyone, to materialize. But no one did. Just that same heavy silence hanging in the air like a thick fog. I chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the creeping dread building in my chest. "All right, who's messing with me?" I called out, half expecting some prankster teenager to pop out from behind the pews, laughing. No one responded. The church was dead silent. I sat there for another minute, debating whether I should get up and leave, but then it happened again. That same voice, calm, steady, and just loud enough to send chills down my spine. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." This time, I swear to God, pun fully intended, the voice was clearer. I sat bolt upright, my breath catching in my throat. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a handyman. I'm not easily spooked. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff, rats in walls, flickering lights, the works. But this wasn't a loose pipe or a bad wire. This was something else. I stood up and stepped out of the booth, shining my flashlight around the church, trying to see if anyone was hiding in the shadows. But there was no one. No signs of movement, no footsteps, no nothing. Just me and the confession booth. I was about to pack up my things and hightail it out of there when I noticed something odd. The door to the other side of the booth, the penitent's side, was slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it when I came in. It had been closed, locked, just like the priest's side. Slowly, and I mean very slowly, I walked over and pushed the door open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the empty booth. Nothing unusual until I noticed the faintest outline of something carved into the wooden seat. I leaned in closer, running my fingers over the words etched into the wood. It wasn't in English, or at least it didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. It was a series of symbols, jagged and rough, as if someone had scratched them into the wood with a knife. Before I could even process what it meant, the whisper came again. Louder this time. "Forgive me, Father." I stumbled back, my flashlight clattering to the floor. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. That's when I made the executive decision to nope right out of there. I grabbed my stuff and bolted for the exit, not caring if I left half my tools behind. The next day, I called Father Brennan and told him I couldn't fix his plumbing problem. He didn't sound surprised. In fact, he sounded relieved, like he knew exactly what had happened. "Thank you, Jacob," he said quietly. "You weren't the first." That was all I needed to hear. Needless to say, I'm sticking to fixing broken heaters and leaky faucets from now on. And if anyone ever asks me to step inside a confessional booth again, I'll pass. You know, just to be safe. Because whatever was in that booth, it wasn't looking for forgiveness. Look, I'll be honest, I needed the money. Working night shifts as a security guard isn't glamorous, but it beats eating instant noodles for every meal. When I got hired to cover the graveyard shift at St. Agnes Hospital, I figured it'd be the same as any other gig. Lots of coffee, Netflix on my phone, and the occasional walk around to make sure nobody was breaking in to steal a defibrillator. Easy, right? Wrong. Now, before you get the wrong idea, St. Agnes wasn't some spooky, abandoned hospital where lights flicker and shadows crawl. It was still an active hospital, but most of the wings were old, dating back to when it used to be a convent-run medical center. Over the years, the nuns had slowly left or, passed on, and the place had been converted into a regular hospital. Well, sort of. They kept a lot of the old religious stuff, crosses on every wall, stained glass windows, even a creepy old chapel in the basement. Yeah, you heard me right. A chapel. In the basement. But none of that really bothered me at first. I mean, I wasn't there for a history lesson. I was just there to make sure the place didn't burn down overnight. My first week on the job was boring. Boring was good. Boring meant nothing weird was happening. That all changed on my fifth night. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was about 2 a.m., the hour when everything gets weird, and I was sitting at my little desk in the security room, watching the cameras. Most of the monitors showed the usual empty hallways, dim lights, the occasional nurse passing by. Then there was that hallway, the one that led to the old wing. It hadn't been used in years. Patients were moved to the new building ages ago. All that was left back there were a few storage rooms, some old medical equipment, and, of course, the chapel. Now, I'd never gone back there myself because, well, why would I? The place was basically a relic, forgotten by everyone except the janitor who occasionally swept up dust bunnies. But as I was zoning out, half watching a YouTube video on my phone, I caught something on the camera that made me sit up real fast. There was a person standing in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just one of the nurses. You know, maybe they were lost or looking for some supplies. But then I realized, no, this person wasn't moving. They were just standing there, perfectly still. They were wearing one of those old-fashioned nurse uniforms, white dress, little cap, the whole 9 yards. My first thought was, wow, someone takes Halloween very seriously. But it wasn't Halloween. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The nurse still wasn't moving. She was standing right in front of the door to the chapel, her back to the camera, just staring at it like she was waiting for something. Okay, this is weird, I muttered to myself. Maybe it was some kind of mannequin. Left over from, like, a hospital exhibit or something. But no, that didn't make sense either. I hadn't seen it there before. I decided to be a responsible security guard for once and check it out. I grabbed my flashlight, clipped my radio to my belt, and headed down the elevator toward the old wing. The hospital was dead quiet, no pun intended. As I walked through the empty halls, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving everything that faint, washed-out glow that always makes hospitals feel way creepier at night. I reached the entrance to the old wing and stopped. The door was already open, which was strange because it was supposed to be locked at night. I stepped through and immediately felt the temperature drop. It wasn't just colder, it was freezing. The kind of cold that makes you feel like the air itself is holding its breath. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the hallway. Nothing. The corridor stretched out in front of me, long and empty, the chapel door at the far end. And no nurse. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing way too loudly for my liking. The closer I got to the chapel door, the more I started to regret taking this job. My flashlight flickered as I approached the door, and I muttered, "Come on, don't die on me now." When I reached the chapel, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door was slightly ajar. Now, I know what you're thinking. Don't go in there. That's how people die in horror stories. And believe me, I was thinking the same thing. But what was I supposed to do? Call my boss and say, "Hey, can I just not?" I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The chapel was small and cramped, just a few rows of wooden pews and a stone altar. Candles lined the walls, but none of them were lit. And yet, somehow, there was this faint glow in the room. It was soft, almost like moonlight, but I knew there were no windows down here. That's when I saw her. The nurse. She was sitting in the front pew, her head bowed like she was praying. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. Her uniform was pristine, no dust, no dirt, nothing. She looked like she just stepped out of a 1950s medical drama, except she didn't seem right. Her movements were too slow, too deliberate. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unsure if I should say something, leave, or just scream. Finally, I cleared my throat, hoping to break the tension. Ma'am, you can't be here. Smooth, I know. Top-notch security guard material. She didn't respond. Just kept sitting there, like she didn't even hear me. I took a step closer, my heart thudding in my chest. "Ma'am, this area is off limits." Still nothing. I was about to turn and run when she finally moved. Slowly, she lifted her head and turned to look at me. That's when I saw her face. Or rather, I didn't. Her face was completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless surface where a face should have been. I let out a noise that I will never, ever describe as a scream, but let's just say I'm glad no one was there to hear it. The nurse stood up, her blank face tilting as if she was considering me for a moment. And then she took a step forward. That was all I needed. I bolted out of the chapel so fast, I'm pretty sure I broke some kind of land speed record. I didn't stop running until I was back at my desk in the security room, gasping for breath, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't even hold my flashlight. I watched the camera feed for the rest of the night, but the nurse never reappeared. The hallway was empty, just as it had been before. The next day, I told my supervisor about the incident, and he just laughed. "Oh, you saw her?" he asked casually, like I'd just mentioned the weather. "Her? What do you mean, her?" He leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. "The nurses used to talk about her. Said she was a nun who worked as a nurse during the war. Helped the soldiers who came in here for treatment. But something happened. No one's really sure what. Some say she still comes around at night, checking on the patients." I stared at him, wide-eyed. "And you didn't think to mention this before hiring me?" He shrugged. "Figured you'd find out eventually." "Yeah. Thanks for the heads up, pal. Needless to say, I don't work at St. Agnes anymore."